Well, my family that's listening, if I die soon, book Jake, please, at the funeral.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I would love to do your funeral if it ends tragically young.
We are back. It's a brand new episode. This is Laugh With Me, a podcast with Jeremy Odom. I'm your host, J.O. Oh, we've got a good one for you this week. Shit, we're bringing the guest back. Episode 70, Season 2, Laugh With Me. We've got stand-up comedian and podcaster Jake Silberman from New York, New York. And he's just released his brand new special, Jake Silberman, live from Portland. You can find it on YouTube today. Do it now. Pause the show. Pause the show. Johnny, stop. Johnny, pause the show. I need folks, seriously, to get their mind right. Go watch the special, then come back and listen to the podcast. Okay? Nobody else is telling you to do shit like that. Nobody is saying, stop my product and go listen to someone else's and then maybe come back to mine. I'm telling you this because it's that damn good. Jake Silberman, live from Portland. You can find it on YouTube. If you follow Laugh With Me on any of our socials, you are going to have your ability to find the link very quickly and accessibly. Let's just say that. So, for those of you that paused and watched it, you're thanking me right now, aren't you? Yeah, I know that you are. You're thanking me. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome, America. For those of you that didn't pause and go watch, I trust that you'll listen to the show and you will go listen and watch later. Jake Silberman is our guest this week on Laugh With Me. Jake, live from Portland, the brand new special, out on YouTube. It dropped the end of October.
Yep.
Hilarious, by the way.
Thanks so much.
Like how long? Like what was the process? Like how long were you working on like that specific like set of material?
Most of it was in the last probably from COVID on. I think there was maybe one joke that I had done, the Elon Musk joke I had written before COVID, and it was kind of just like one of the mainstays in the act for a while, and obviously was like ready to get it, like published and put it out somewhere. So yeah, I think most of the stuff, like, cause like living in the van, that was like, I bought that van in 2021 during the pandemic. And then obviously the election stuff, there was a little bit of election stuff. So that was just this most recent election. So yeah, most of it, yeah, within the last few years of kind of writing and touring with it. And yeah, I was happy to be able to film it. I started comedy in Portland, so it was kind of a fun place. Even though I live in New York City now, it was fun to like go back and record it there. So, and people, it's getting out there, I don't really have any expectations for it. So, it's good that people, for the most part, seem to be enjoying it who watch it.
Kind of first full piece of material that you have put forward, right? I mean, at least that I could find.
Yeah, I did an all crowd work one in 2020. I actually recorded it like 3 weeks before the pandemic.
Oh.
And so I did that. But yeah, this is the first one where it's just material. So much different process for sure.
So I'm guessing Portland then was chosen not just based because of the material itself, but just because like you said, that's where you were from. I mean, it was a hot crowd.
Very hot crowd. So yeah, a little background stuff. It's like I recorded this actually as a feature set because the set is like, I think the video is only like 32 minutes, so it's not the full hour. But I was featuring for Nick Mullen, who had like 5 sold out shows, and then I actually headlined the club on a Sunday, but I don't think we used any shots from the headlining just because like I think I sold like 110 tickets and every one of Nick's shows was sold out. So obviously the audio, just the laughs are going to get bigger. So yeah, but I was happy with how it turned out. It was fun. It's kind of like a no pressure situation when you do that because like Nick sold all the tickets, and then I got to like get the kind of this benefit out of it. But it was very nice because his crowd is very fun, and I think they're kind of in line with the stuff I'm doing. So it like worked. It was like a good fit, and I had like asked him, like, hey, do you mind if I do this? And he didn't care. So yeah, it all worked out, and the people at the club are great. I've known people at that club for my whole time doing comedy, and I have a lot of like long relationships there in Portland because I started comedy in Portland in 2013, and so I was there for 9 years before I moved to New York in 2022. So I have a lot of people, and they helped me a lot get it off the ground and stuff. So yeah, really appreciative of all those guys.
Yeah, so it's interesting because like we were just saying, you were the feature that night. I've heard differing takes. Some people, and I would disagree on. Some people would say, well, you can't go out there and go balls to the wall and take from the headliner. Like, you just got to get the crowd warmed up. And I'm on the opinion of you go out there and do you, and you crush, and you get the laughs, and you get people warmed up for the headliner. I guess where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I understand that the first one where it's like you shouldn't ever take away, but like I just think that like it's a disservice to you and the audience to like hold back or like pull punches.
Yeah.
Like I don't know why you would do that for a comedy show.
Right.
There is, though, I do feel that pressure sometimes. Like I don't think it's like, I think a lot of people who are opening for people do feel this pressure. Not that you're like going to show them up, but you're just like, you might not have full freedom to do like maybe like, something happens in the audience. Sometimes if I'm featuring for somebody, let's say something happens with the audience, like if I was headlining, I might explore that a little bit more. I might do like some crowd work, or I might but like when I'm featuring, I generally am just like, I'm just going to let this be because I don't want to like fuck the energy up,
Yeah.
Even if it is like a big pop, I don't want to. So there is that energy, but when you're, you should be doing the best you can. And I also think that if a headliner is good and they are like true, like they love comedy, they're not gonna want you to do that. And I think they would not be also worried about like they're a headliner for a reason.
Exactly.
They have an audience for a reason. Like I opened for Big Jay Oakerson a couple times, and one time I was like, hey man, I know you do a lot of crowd work. And especially when I was doing the crowd work album, I was like doing a lot of crowd work in my sets to get ready for it. And I was like, I do some, but I know that you do it. And if you don't want me to do any, that's cool. He's like, dude, I don't care. Like if you talk, like he was just so confident, and he'd be like, if I talk to somebody that you did, like I'll move on or I'll find something. Like he was just so like, I do whatever you do, man, I'm not tripping. And I really liked that because it was just like, oh, dope. I like that he's just so comfortable with it. But I've also had headliners tell me like, hey, I'm kind of gonna do some crowd work tonight. So, and I respect it. I would never like go over them, but I feel like most headliners are just like, dude, I have an hour, like I'm going to be fine,
Yeah. And that's the thing. You never know when you're going to pick up new fans. I mean, a lot of these people, they bought tickets to see Big Jay Oakerson, but they also now just became a fan of Jake Silverman. Like that's awesome. Like that wins for comedy.
Totally. You want that. You want fans of the headliner to come up to you and be like, dude, I can't wait to see you perform next time, or let me know when you're next in this town again or whatever, because that's how you build it. I mean, before social media, that was exactly how you did it. You would open for people, or you would do your own small tours. And so, yeah, you have to do as well as you can. But I do understand that pressure of being like, I don't want to fuck the show up. But I think if you're a good comic, you know that line pretty well.
So you just brought up social media. I mean, that's kind of a lot, not a lot, but there is a significant number of comics that are getting spots, because of social media presence. Like, do you feel pressure to really dive into that, or is that just another element of kind of the machine of what you're trying to accomplish?
I mean, I think every comedian is lying if they don't say they think about it a lot. I think it's kind of taken over comedy in a way. And I don't know, how long have you been doing comedy, or like what's your, like when did you start?
So my background is just after COVID. So like I took Zach's class, and I started and I started that during COVID, and just been doing comedy here in the Midwest since then, and started the podcast. But So yeah, so I'm fairly new. I'm nowhere near,
Okay.
where you two are as far as like longevity,
Yeah.
but so I'm living that like social media world is what I know as far as like doing comedy.
Yeah, it's weird because I have this like kind of dual experience of as the millennial person, just as a non-comedian sense of like I have a clear childhood and like early teenage years without cell phones and without constant access to the internet and
Yep.
like all of a sudden like in my 20s that became a thing where like I had the internet in my pocket everywhere I went, but there was like like I have core memories of my time. I have memories when cell phones came out and I was like I just like couldn't understand why anybody would want one. I was
Right.
like I was kind of the last kid in my friend group to get one, and I didn't really, but then everybody else gets one, and you're kind of like, oh, I guess I got to get one. So I have that memory, and I also feel like that is kind of like I have like a microcosm version of that in comedy because I started comedy in 2013. I did my first open mic in Minneapolis, which is where I'm from originally, and I did about 4 or 5 weeks of open mics in Minneapolis, and then I ended up moving out to Portland, kind of unrelated to comedy, but continued it there. So I claim Portland as my home scene, even though technically Minneapolis was my first official time on stage. But I started, in my first few years of comedy, the older comics would tell me like, YouTube was around, but they would like, don't ever put any material online. Like you're saving all your jokes for an album, like an audio album. Like
Right.
I literally like, this is like dinosaur stuff now, like this
Yeah.
doesn't even, this makes no sense to a new comic or a comic who started like in your era where like a few years ago, like, but the advice back in the day was like, don't ever release anything until it's like your album. And so I was kind of on this weird like border of like kind of one foot in the old world and one foot in the new because I was a few years in when like people started getting Instagram and like I had an Instagram for a bit and then I deleted it and I finally got one for like comedy back just in 2019, so not even that like long ago really. And it's completely changed since I started of like actually now the philosophy is put everything you almost ever do immediately online. Like
Yep.
the special, like the thing I just did is kind of like it's very accessible to everyone because everybody now has a camera and you can just film a set and that's a special and it's almost like you almost do the special because then you can clip it up and put it on social media. So it's like it's very weird because the whole point of the special is to kind of show people like this is like a body of work. I can do this time. I can be a headliner or whatever. And now it's like mine was 32 minutes because it's like, why would I put an hour out? Like, who's going to watch my hour? So you got to like kind of decide like what the masses are even ready for from you as an artist or you as a comedian. Like, well, who are you? Jake Silverman is a nobody. So it's like, why would we watch an hour? But you give him a half an hour, maybe like, okay, like I'll take a chance on this. I'll watch 10 minutes of this random guy. So there's all these other things now that have happened since I started, and social media is this huge thing. And like, it's like a lot of things. It's good and bad, like, I don't like the total basically monopoly it has on comedy now. I think it's changed comedians and it's changed comedy in a way that's like not really the greatest for the art form. I don't think it's great that everything just needs to be online for it to be valid as comedy now, like it's just like so many people are doing shows and you can tell that they're doing it for the camera and not the audience,
They're playing for clips. Like they just want to play to the clip. Yeah.
And I don't like that. I don't think it's good for comedians' development. And I don't think it really like comedy people like who start comedy or like not even start, but like I guess, comedians, let's say, they have a memory of like seeing their first comedy show and being like kind of intoxicated by it.
Mm-hmm.
Online social media does not capture that. It just can't. It cannot capture the feeling of being in the room when you're just watching a clip on your phone. So I think it's like giving the audience who come to comedy now a whole different vibe because when you're in a room where comedy is being performed, like there's a feeling to it. There's like a visceralness to it. Like, you're part of a group. It's not an isolated experience that you're watching alone in your bedroom, So it's completely like divorced what the art form is, which is for a live audience, to this like new like thing, but it has given people careers. Some of them are funny, some of them are not, and that's unfortunate to some of the people who aren't that funny or who are kind of hacky or just kind of like just blasting the algorithm over and over again are getting fans. But like, I don't know. It's a weird tug of war because every comedian has had this conversation thousands of times. Like, do you post more? Should you just post less? What should you post? When should you post? And I think it's made comedy hangs bad because a lot of hangs used to be like just goofing around and throwing bits around and just busting balls. And now it's like, God, I mean, the amount of times I'm at like a hang and it's like talks about posting, I'm just like, what the fuck are we talking about right now? We're talking about posting, dude? Like, this sucks.
Yep. We're supposed to be making each other laugh. Like, that's that's the deal. Like, that's the best.
I mean, I was with some comics the other day, and like I just kind of let it be because they're my friends, but like, so I didn't say anything, but you know, one of them was like, dude, I'm getting really into posting again. And I just wanted to be like, dude, that's the lamest sentence I've ever heard a comic say. It's like, I'm getting really into posting again. But you just have to kind of be like, I get it, you know, like all three of those comics were ahead of me in a career-wise because they have bigger social media followings. And that is also weird because it creates this weird dynamic of like authenticity based on this like number, you know, which is odd. You're just like, the respect or what you should be judging people on in comedy is like who's the funniest or who's getting better or who's working the hardest or who's writing the best jokes, not this number attached to this profile online and like what that means you deserve or what that means you get. But it is the world we live in. So it's like kind of like I think every comic has this like battle with how far do I want to go into it? You know, some comics are like, you find some comics who have no social media following, you know, like they don't do anything and they're really funny. And then you have some who have 100, 200, 300,000 and they're fine or whatever. Like maybe they're good, maybe they're not, but like they've decided like, nope, I'm going to do this. This is what I'm going to make. So I don't know. It's wild. We'll see how it all turns out. I mean, they might delete TikTok in 90 days. So then what does that mean for all these people who just built that whole thing up? You know?
I know. I was thinking about, you know, one of your jokes talking about that a certain genre of people that you have in your special, you know, the hustle go folks. And it's like those people, if TikTok goes away, a lot of those people are going to be unemployed and looking for a way to find something to do their trade, and it's going to be tough. I mean, it's going to be damn tough.
Yeah, they'll have to find a new app to lie to people on.
Yep.
yeah, it's very strange.
So how do you feel? Like you and I both, we have podcasts, right? We're on a podcast right now, but like a lot of like the conversations, or at least the belief of the conversations that comics would have, you know, amongst each other outside of shows or whatever. Is that kind of like today's podcast now?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, everything is saturated now is the thing. That's like podcasts when they first started were this kind of new, inventive, totally free, you know, you could talk for 3 hours, you could talk for a half an hour. There was no limits. It was whatever you wanted to say, unmediated, just to the people. And it's like crazy. Like that's a great thing to have. But like podcasts, everybody has one now. Social media, so it's just like now you also are like just having to, there's so much stuff for people to see that to even find you, that's why it is like either you got to get, I think in podcasting, you have to get really lucky. Let's say that you get somebody finds you and they spread it or, you know, whatever.
Yep.
Or it's just repetition. And you have to make it your thing and you have to be promoting it constantly. I mean, comics always have had to promote themselves, but it really is like so much of the business is promoting. Like it would be interesting to ask like 10 comics, like, if a pie chart of your time when you spend doing like comedy stuff, how much is it writing? How much is it performing? How much is it, you know, like what, cause dude, I mean, dude, so much of my time is like, I'm on my laptop looking at Google Maps and looking at an Excel spreadsheet and being like, okay, like where can I go? Where can I tour? And that stuff takes so much time, you know, of just reaching out to people, figuring out where I can work. And then, then doing my podcast, doing other people's podcasts, like making clips, pushing those clips. Like so much of this is just advertising. It is really crazy. You don't think about that, I think, when you start. Like when I started, I was just like, it's jokes. And it's basically like, write a joke, get on stage, do the joke, repeat. And it's actually like very little of that when you start to make it your career and your work. It's like, no, it's actually like Monday, Tuesday, I spend all day on the computer, basically. If I don't have anything going on, I'm like Monday and Tuesday are my like send booking emails, figure out schedule. I mean, I have dates in April already, you know, and I'm like, and I'm worried that there are not enough dates in April already. You know, I'm just like, I don't have enough work in spring. What's summer going to look like? What's next fall going to look like? You know, and it kind of consumes everything about you. You know, I'm always like writing little notes to myself, like, oh, you got to email this guy. I mean, it's a constant upkeep, you know, in terms of that. And that's not what you get into it for. You don't get into it to be your own like secretary, basically.
Right. You're in for the jokes. You're in for the make people laugh. So like, how much of, or maybe not at all, but when you're looking at, like you said, Excel spreadsheets or whatever and maps and looking at where to go, how much of that are you looking at where people like listen to your podcasts, or maybe people who you have high penetration like on your socials? Do you look at any of that and say, okay, maybe I have a market in St. Louis that I didn't know I had, you know, like for example?
I don't really, because I still have such a small following that like the idea, like you can, like I can look at my three majors and it's always going to be Portland, probably like California in general, but probably more like LA and then New York. Like those are the three, but that's just because of like where I mean, Portland is where I live in New York, and then LA is probably just because of like comedy, like just it's such a huge market that people who like comedy live there, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't have enough people to really like use any of those like insights, because I do know people who do that religiously. Like they have 100,000 followers and they know exactly like where they can sell tickets. And that, dude, that's a whole area that I am so out of. Like, look, when you can go to a place, set up a show, do the ticketing, run ads, all that stuff is like so intimidating to me. And I'm like dipping my toes into it because that's kind of the next wave that you have to hit. But it's really impressive that people can do it, but it's another version of this, like, you're more doing, like, you're basically like a businessman, or you're like in advertising than comedy. And I think there's this weird, like, someone explained it to me like a long time ago where me and this comic were in the back of a club and we were watching this comic who was very unfunny. And I think he's quit comedy since, so, you know, there's no reason to name it, but he just wasn't that funny ever. And he'd been doing it for a long time. But he got so many gigs and he knew all these people and he worked with all these people. And I turned to the guy next to me, I was like, how is he always working? And he goes, comedy is like a spectrum of like funny on one side and like business on the other. And like you kind of need to be in the middle. And now some people are all funny and they have nothing going on. Like they don't have their own checking account. They don't know how to book a flight. Like they are just like so funny on stage, but it's a mess. And then there's some people like this guy where it's like, business. He knows all the emails. He knows how to network. He knows where to be, when to be, go to the parties, like shake the right hands. And that gets him into certain things that he probably stage-wise doesn't really deserve, you know? There are much funnier comedians. So you try to be in that balance zone of like bringing the fucking heat when it comes to the stage, but you have to have your ducks in a row. You have to understand, like, again, like you have to know that, like, all right, well, right now it's December, so clubs are probably booking for like the second half of the year right now. They're probably mostly booked for the first 5 to 6 months starting in January. So you got to be hitting them up, be like, what's the back end of 2025 looks like? And if you don't like think about those things, if you don't plan for it, you will be in some ways like out of luck, because there's just too many hungry mouths to feed and people are asking, you know, everybody is in some way fighting for a limited amount of spots, you know? And so you have to be one of these people who's like constantly checking this stuff. And if you're not, like, even if you're really funny, at some point someone's going to find you probably, and they'll be like, hey man, I'll take care of this. But there's a lot of people who are really funny who just, they're not big on social media, they're really funny on stage, but like maybe no one ever really saw them, and then they're just kind of like a stuck in their local scene type of guy, you know?
Right. So you were in Portland for a long time. Then you said in 2022 you left?
Yeah, I moved in June of 2022
to New York.
Well, yes, but it took a while because I was living in the van at the time. So I was renting a room in Portland, had owned this van for a year, got in the van, and like lived in the van from like the end of June through July, August, September, and I think maybe a little bit in October of that year. And then I rented a spot in actually even into October. So like November 7th is the date I officially count of moving to New York, because that's when I like moved into my apartment in Astoria. So there's a number of months traveling, touring out of this van.
So the van, was that just like, so it's like a tour bus? I mean, basically, is that how you treated it?
I mean, it was a 2002 Ford E150 van. It was like a white plumber's van. It was like a work van, you know, like any handyman has this van. So I couldn't stand up in it. It was my buddy who was in like the van. He was a Salem, Oregon comic, and he knew how to build out stuff. So he helped me, like, he basically built me like a pretty like basic but like functional interior where there was like a raised bed and some light storage and stuff. But yeah, it was, you know, it wasn't like fancy in any way, but it did, you know, it allowed me, it's the only reason I think really I can even tour now is because I spent, you know, in 21, I got this van because I made this documentary where I crossed the country in this van with a cameraman, kind of documenting how comedy was coming back after COVID. So it's on my YouTube channel if people want to watch it. It's called Back at It. So 70 plus minute documentary where we leave from Portland, end up in New York City. We go to all these little different spots. We do street interviews, all this stuff. Shows me like doing little spots at different. So I bought that. I did that for a couple months, and then just kind of let it be. And then the next summer when I moved, I got into it, and I was like, well, instead of just like driving across to New York in 4 days, like, let's see more comedy stuff. So I was in Denver for a month and did like a bunch of shows there, and was kind of like crashing on my buddy's couch for a while. And then it just allowed me to explore places that I wouldn't have been able to, because like so many, when you're starting to tour, like, it's not like the venues that you're doing, the shows you're doing, there's no hotel.
Right.
There's no, like, you're making $20, you know, you're not making much money. At best, you're breaking even. Maybe a couple gigs here, you make a couple $100, but for the most part, like, you're not. So having my own basically hotel on wheels, like to bed to sleep in every night, allowed me to be like, well, cool, as long as I have gas to get there, I can do the show and then sleep there. And that, like, I made so many connections over the last few years doing the van stuff, because I was just able to do, I mean, I've crossed the country like 5 times, just like going to every little nook and cranny just to be like, oh, okay. And then you build that network of connections, and all of a sudden you can be like, oh, I haven't been to wherever. I haven't been to Cleveland in a year. Let's see what's out in Cleveland, you know? And that totally built my ability to tour now, where I am based in New York. I don't live in the van anymore. I can like fly to places, or I can like maybe make a small run where I rent a car but still make enough money to cover stuff. So that's like that opened up a whole different world that I probably would not be in right now had I not had the van.
Where's the van now?
The van is currently parked in my parents' driveway in Minneapolis, and I am getting ready to sell it this spring, I think. It's just, you know, I did it and that was a fun phase of life, but now I'm more into like trying to do these things where, like, you know, you want to elevate, you want to go to a place where you can be like, all right, well, now I want to do a club weekend where I can fly in on a Thursday, fly out on a Sunday, make enough money to justify everything, or that type of stuff. Like, living in the van was cool, but it was hard, you know. It's a hard life to be in a van and like searching for bathrooms and showers and like where you're going to eat and like where you're going to park, where you sleeping, what's the route, like what neighborhood, like all that is like when you do it, you get used to it and you understand it. But anytime you like get out of it, you're like, bro,
Yeah.
I was living rough, you know. I was like, it's so nice to have access to your own bathroom. And like, you know, if you just like need a night where you're like, oh, I don't want to be sleeping literally like basically on the street, you know, like I have my own room now. Like so it's hard to like want to go back to that. I could, if something really fell off for me, I know how to do it, but I don't want to go back to that.
Yeah. You don't want to go back to that.
Yeah.
So why, or what, I guess, not so much why. I guess kind of why New York is the move, but what were you deciding at that point? You're in Portland, like were you considering like a Chicago or even down south, or was it just, you know, New York's a place to be, maybe you have connections, friends, or what have you?
New York to me, like I had been to New York when I was 13. My aunt took me as a bar mitzvah present, and so I really loved New York just as a person. I had been a couple of times pre-comedy, so it was kind of like a light dream to just live there, even years and years before knowing about comedy or doing comedy. But then when I started doing comedy, I really kind of was drawn to the New York comic. You know, I was a Bill Burr fan. He was like the guy who got me into doing it. I was an Attell fan. I was a Norton fan. I was an Opie and Anthony, Patrice, like Louis, like all those New York guys were the guys I like gravitated to their comedy and their persona and their style. And obviously like there's really good comics in LA, but I always just, for me, I was like, New York is where you go if you want to be a killer stand-up, you know? Now there are obviously Comedy Store guys who are really good, but there is more of that Hollywood influence in LA where it's like, oh, you might kind of be an actor, you might kind of be a whatever. You come to New York and it's a gym to get better at stand-up, and you are around killers. You're around people who you just be at an open mic with and be like, damn, dude, this guy's writing good stuff and he's just a nobody, you know? Like he's not doing anything. But so you're just around people who are really hungry. The city makes them really hungry. It's a tough place to live, so you're just kind of like, I just think it all feeds into that like mindset of like, you get really, really, really good here. You get tight, and you're just subconsciously even, I think you just know that everybody here is working hard. Everybody here is here to be a professional, and everybody here is sacrificing so much personal comfort to live in a city like New York. I mean, it is a hard place to live sometimes. It's expensive. It's loud. To be here and still want to do comedy where the gigs are rough, the audiences are tough sometimes. When you're not working the Cellar or some of the main clubs and you're doing these rough bar shows or these kind of bar shows where maybe there's a handful of people who care or don't care, like that is going to make you better. You know,
so like in Omaha, you know, each night, almost every night, there's at least one mic, sometimes two. Okay.
Yeah.
And if I want to get on the list, I'm on the list.
Sure.
In New York, like, is it like a grind during the afternoon, early in the day to try to get on that list to make sure you can get spots at night, or how's that work?
There are enough mics that if you want to do a couple mics every day, you can easily get on the list. I mean, you just got to know how to do it. But so there's never like a shortage of like mic time. But the thing is, like the mics here are brutal. It's comics only. I mean, when I was in Portland, man, we had audiences at mics sometimes. You know, they were every Tuesday at Helium Comedy Club, my home club, and where I recorded the special. You would do an open mic and there would be 120 people there, you know? Like you could get a tape out of that. Like you could get a 5-minute tape. And as a guy who worked the club, like if you were a host or a feature pass at the club, you got a guaranteed spot every Tuesday. So it's like you could always be working on new stuff, but you had a real live audience. That does not exist here. Like you are doing it for 30 other comics, almost all guys a lot of the time. Some of these mics you go to, there's not a woman around. Mm-hmm. So it's like a lot of disinterested men on their phones. It's tough, you know, like it is a tough place. And I usually, the way I do it is I try to go to one mic a day, and then a lot of New York is, especially for, me who's new, and I moved here with very few real connections. I knew a few people, I knew a handful of people who could help me out here or there, but I really did not come with anything in the bag. Like, I didn't come knowing that I was going to get spots the day I landed, like some people do when they have a whole community here.
Yep.
Like the Chicago guys, like the guys who move from Chicago to New York, that's like a pipeline. So these new Chicago guys come in and they just have a group of guys who have been here for years, and they're like, all right, we'll get you on this show. We'll kind of introduce you to these people. And I kind of had to truly start from like ground zero. Like I did not know really anybody who was going to be able to help me in that way. So, but a lot of it is networking. A lot of it is going to shows you're not on, meeting the producer, shaking hands, hanging out late,
Yep.
If there's comics hanging out at a bar, especially if you're new, you should be there. You should be up there and you should be around them and you should be a good time. And like, we didn't need to do that in Portland because like, kind of like Omaha, like no one was not going to get on a list in Portland, like It was just like, and like, if you didn't do the bar show this week, you were probably booked on it the next week. So it was never like, oh, I need to show face. I need to make sure that they know who I am. It's like, everybody knew everybody. You could do comedy in Portland for 2 weeks and people would be like, oh yeah, this guy does comedy now, I guess, and that's it.
Yeah.
So New York though, it's like you meet new people every day here and it's just like, oh, this guy, he's great. I never knew about him. This lady, she's funny. I gotta be aware of her now. I mean, it's constantly meeting people and then like making sure those people you met remember you because you see them more than once every 6 months. So I'm out every night almost in some capacity. If it's Mike, go to a show, or if I'm doing a show, then maybe I try to go to another show, or, oh, hey, where are people hanging tonight? Like, it's a very social scene when you're starting because a lot of it is like, they have to remember your face. They just have to be like, oh yeah, that guy Jake, we should get him on the show sometime because he came out, he was fun to talk to, well, like, whatever. Like, so much of it is that, and you just don't really get that. I don't think in any other scene really, because even the comics I've talked to in LA, they're like, the driving that's required in LA, like they're not spot hopping. They're not going to 3 places a night. But in New York, it's all the subway. No one has a car here. So you're just like, all right, well, I'm going to do this mic at 7. This show starts at 8:30. I'll be there. And then there's a late show that I'm going to go to. Or I know there's this birthday hang that I'm going to be at, and I'll be there for a couple hours. And then maybe me and 3 other comics will break off and we'll get some pizza. And then I'll be home at 2, and we start it over the next day. So it's a job.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a full-time job. Yeah.
It's a lifestyle, man. It's weird. It's very weird.
So do you enjoy, I mean, obviously the social and all that, it's exciting, but do you enjoy the competitive part of it?
It's weird. I go back and forth on like how competitive I am. Like there's certain times where I'm like, all right, you need to like step up and like smash. But I don't think about it as a competition as much as maybe I even should, because you start to just realize like over time, like everybody kind of has their lane. Everybody kind of has their style. It's more an internal competition with yourself, I think, is where I kind of land on it now. It's like, what is the standard I'm holding myself to? It's like, because if you get lazy, you're fucked. I mean, there's too many good people who want this just as bad or more than you do, that if you start to let yourself slip, and every scene has this guy or this person, like they have they were funny, but they kind of got lazy and no one really pushed them because they kept getting booked, and you can kind of see like, they kind of keep doing the same material every set, and like all of a sudden it's like you're getting passed. So I think it's more about internally, like, can you keep that fire going? Can you keep the standard that should have for yourself met or exceeding that? And then be honest with yourself. Are you doing as well as you think you're doing? Are you writing new stuff that's good? And it's not just on stage. It's like, are you going out enough? Are you taking maybe 1 too many nights off a week where you're not really part of the scene? Are you sending enough emails? Like there's a standard for everything you do in the business. It's not just on stage. It is all that other stuff we talked about.
How much, like, you just brought up, like, he does a lot of the same material. I mean, do you hear those notes, like, from, like, bookers and producers of shows?
I don't know. I mean, I don't hear a lot of those notes, like, I mean, I'm sure if I was starting to ask, like, hey, like, what do you look for? But, like, I think more just like you get those comments from other comics who are like,
Okay.
you see so and so, they're kind of doing the same. Like, you just kind of, there's a, comics, you're a comic, we're
Yeah.
gossipy little, we talk a lot of shit. There's a lot of water cooler talking. So people are kind of always keeping tabs on what you're doing, not even in like a weird way, just like, oh, I'm watching your set. What is this? Oh, I hadn't seen that one. But you start to notice pretty quickly, like, how come every time I see this person, they're doing the same set I saw them do 6 months ago or
Yep.
a year ago? Like that's just becomes evident and obvious quickly.
Yeah. Well, one of the themes I caught from your special was death. Is that something that you, I don't know, I guess drive a lot of inspiration from when you're writing, or it just happened to be in this 30 minutes you were bringing up death?
I think honestly, it's like when you're putting, because obviously it wasn't like a theme about death, so it just kind of, the jokes kind of had, I am dark, I am on the darker side, but not like, dark is even a weird word because it is dark, but it's not like, I don't, and maybe as an outsider you could say, but like there's a difference between like dark and like, I don't think a lot of my stuff is like, it's not like Jeselnik edgy. It's not like, it's not like, it doesn't have that, but it is a darker themed. I'll tell you this, it was a lot dirtier than I really thought it was going to be. It's a lot of sex stuff too. When I was like, when I watched the whole thing, I was like, man, like, but you just, you write one joke and you don't necessarily think about like, oh, but then this, and then all of a sudden you do them all together and you're like, damn, this is like a darker set. And I've had other people say that, I did an interview with a guy and he's like, man, you come out the gate abrasive, you kind of just, and he wasn't saying it in a bad way. He's like, you just kind of go for it. You're not really like bringing people to a certain point and then being like, all right, now here's where we get to this stuff. It's like, no, right off the guy. And I think that's how I've been for a while. And, that's probably my natural inclination just as a person is probably a little darker and a little misanthropic. So that probably is going to come out in what you write and who you are on stage. But it's interesting to like think about it as a body of work rather than just individual jokes, like, because when it does, people start to be like, oh, like when I watched it, the first thing when me and the editor were watching, I was like, dude, I did not know it was this filthy, but then you put it together and you're like, oh God. And then you're like, am I this way? Like, is this how people perceive me? Have I been this way this whole time? And I'm just seeing it. Like, it's weird to watch something you do every night when it's kind of like, well, okay, this is what we're going to actually present to people. Because so many of our sets only get seen by that audience live. They don't get recorded. But now, like, when we're recording this, like 22,000 people have watched this thing,
Yep.
That's a lot of people to be like, well, all right, this is what he talks about, It's kind of strange.
One of the things I will tell you, I popped when you mentioned O.J. Simpson because I'm a huge O.J. Simpson fan. And that may
You're a fan?
I'm a fan. I'll tell you why.
Okay, goddamn.
I'm a fan. I grew up, I was a teenager or whatever during the trial, right? I knew him as football. Sure. I knew him as the actor. I knew him as the broadcaster. And then the trial happens, and it happened over the summer. And I was just like fascinated with this trial. It was what everybody was talking about. And then, so I needed everything. I wanted to read books about it. I wanted to watch every day of trial. Of course, I wanted everything. Well, then, as years went by, like he somehow, and I know he was kind of early to cancel culture, but he defied it. He was a Hall of Fame NFL player, a Heisman Trophy winner that not only had all the legal trouble, but then when all that happened, it's not like they kicked him out. They were just like, well, we could separate football. Like we could separate kind of life from what happened here. I mean, he was still a great football player. We're still going to celebrate him.
Sure.
How did that happen? Like that's, to me, I'm still fascinated by how that man, and even when he got through all of the stuff that ended up putting him in prison, then he gets released from prison, and he's on Twitter, he's talking fantasy football. I mean, I followed all of his videos.
He was one of the funniest guys on Twitter, like in this weird way, because it was such a surreal moment. Because I followed him on Twitter because he'd be giving his takes on everything. He was talking about
Yeah.
politics, he was talking about football, he was talking about golf, and you're just like, this man murdered two people,
Yeah.
and he's just there, and it's like but what's like very surreal that we're just like, but now he's just this friendly old guy, and we just kind of all know this about him, but he got off even though he shouldn't have got off, but here he is, and he's just got a Twitter account, and yeah, he's a weird guy. Honestly, dude, the OJ thing, it's so funny. I've had so many people be like, dude, that OJ bit, it's like, I said that in the moment. I didn't write that.
Oh,
That was
wow.
that was literally like he had died a few days before, or maybe a few weeks before, and I said it in the moment, and it just hit right, and I just was like, all right, it's going in the special. Like that's not a written bit. It just would, I said the thing about the OJ, and then I was like, he had died, must have been within a week, so it was like very fresh on top of people's memory. And so, then I say the rest in peace thing, and then it's just like, then it turns into this like, oh, what if he is in heaven? You just kind of build this thing immediately, like in the moment, and then I felt like tight enough that I was like, all right, let's just leave it in. Like that was a fun little moment.
Dude, the Nicole line at the end of the
Yeah.
OJ, like you that was off the dome.
All off the dome. Yeah.
Oh my God. I was
Yeah.
dying. Like,
Yeah, it's so funny. It's like a number of people be like, "That's my favorite bit." I'm just like, man, I gotta write better, I guess, because man, I mean, people are loving the stuff that I took zero thought about, and then the stuff I've written for years. They're like, "Oh, that was good too." But yeah, we love the Nicole stuff.
that's so funny. One of the notes I had about the special, because I'm just like, well, I'm talking to you, I'm gonna make notes, and I'm like, you're a hell of a writer. Like,
Oh,
just
thank you.
the little quips, like just and I'm sure some of it, yeah, like you just said, comes just in the moment. But holy cow, you're writing like I'm gonna go. I've watched the special a number of times already because I'm just like,
thank you.
I'm like inspired by the writing, and I'm like, this is fantastic. But holy cow, I'm even more excited that was off the cuff there in the moment. That's awesome.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how how you kind of think about stand up, but it's like, or who your influences are, but like, I think the most like magical stand up is when there's this, like, I was like a really big Patrice O'Neal fan.
Yeah.
And his Elephant in the Room special, I really do think is one of like the defining specials of stand up, because his jokes are so tight. The stuff he wrote is so good and so tight, and he has such a clear point of view, and it's like a point of view that if you heard it, just a guy saying this in a bar, you'd be like, this is a despicable guy. Like, he's not really a good guy.
Yeah.
But he has a lot of opinions about women that you probably would be like, oh man, this is kind of wild that he's saying this. But in the context of comedy, he just nails it, and it's so funny that he's making women laugh about it. Like, he's crushing in that special. But he has a lot of like crowd worky stuff, or he like, which it takes a lot of balls, especially back in the day, because like, he shot that special. This is like before like this era where any Joe Blow can just get a camera. Like, this is I don't know if it was a Comedy Central special. I forget. I think it was Comedy Central, but like, that's like a big production, and so to take a risk where he's like, I'm going to talk to this interracial couple up front during a special, like, what if it goes bad? And like, now they hate you know what I'm saying? Like, there's so many risks, but he just didn't care. And I really always respected the blend that he was able to talk to the crowd, and it wasn't bad. I mean, crowd work is a whole topic these days, but
Yeah.
good crowd work is still very, very funny. And I think it really does have a place in comedy. And I like doing it when it's good. I think now it's just an overused tool, and I think it's kind of become this thing where it's like, I don't want to burn jokes, so I'll do a crowd thing. But half these guys are just asking the same questions, and they don't really understand how to like develop a relationship with the audience where they can get away with some of the stuff. It's just very interview-like. It's just like name, occupation, dating, and it's like, sure, those are questions that you might even have to ask to get a basis, but like, where's the depth? Where's the unique thing that you're going to pull out of this person that nobody else is going to figure out or find out, or how are you going to go? But all that to say is, like, he was really able, and Attell is like this too. If you've ever seen Attell live, he can talk to the crowd. he can do a riff, and then he can go back into a joke, and it's so seamless. Because a lot of times you'll see a guy do crowd work, and it's hard to go back into a written thought because it's like so obvious that, oh, wait, now we're back to the stuff you said 100 times, and we just had so much fun doing the loose stuff. So those guys were true masters. Or, you know, Dave obviously still touring, and I mean, truly, Dave Attell, one of the few comics when I go see where I laugh like an audience member who doesn't do comedy. Like, he's that good where I'm just like crying, and I, you know, you watch stand up. I've watched how many thousands of hours have I watched of stand up comedy now in my life? You know, the tricks are all exposed. You know what's happening, but man, Attell, dude, he's just so good that I mean, any chance I get to see him, I'm just like, I just get to like enjoy comedy, and I don't have to worry about how I'm breaking it down and how I'm analyzing. I just get to enjoy it as the thing that, you know, we all love. So that is my ideal comic, is like a guy who kind of has that holy triangle of like killer material, killer ability to riff if something weird happens in the moment, and like killer crowd work. If you have those three, like, who's touching you? Like, who's no one, you're unbeatable, because any situation. And you ever talk to any comic who works the cellar and has seen Attell over the years, you know, he goes up last most nights. He's like the closing spot on the late show. He's going up at like 1 or 1:30 sometimes, 2 in the morning maybe. And, you know, I hear all these comics like, oh man, I was there with Attell one night, and, you know, you get off stage, you go, oh, they were rough, and he goes, all right, and he just goes out there, the crowd that was quote unquote rough, he just annihilates. He immediately finds the thing that you know, and every comic at the cellar has a Attell story like that. I'm like, oh man, everybody had a rough set, and Attell came in, and within 2 seconds he was there. He had them howling, and it's like, that's generational talent. Not everybody's going to get there, but like, that's the goal, I think, is like, when you want to model yourself after, like, truly anything that happens on stage, I'm equipped to handle it. If it's a tight crowd who only wants jokes, they don't want to be talked to, you got a killer hour. If it's a crowd that's like, they're not really paying attention to the drunk, you can talk to them, you can bring them back. If it's a loose crowd that wants something more like artsy or like flowy, you get like more the Rory, Sam Talent kind of stuff. Like, if you can combine all that, it's just like, it's like in baseball, you're like a 5-tool player. Like, you got it all. You got speed, power, you got the whole batting average, home run. So that type of thing is how I look at like how am I developing those areas, you know? And it's like always pushing yourself to get the writing can always be stronger. The riffing can always be stronger. You can always be less fear-based on stage. Like, I'm really getting into the whole Rory philosophy of like going up with nothing and just being like okay with silence, and just being like learning to just I mean, I don't know. I just saw Rory at the 10,000 Laughs Festival. He did like an hour and 10 minutes completely improvised. He had a piano backer, so you just had this guy playing like light piano, standing ovation. I mean, the guy, he basically did a whole one-man play almost. It wasn't even really stand-up. It's like he's doing this whole scene work, talking to the audience that's going into the crowd, because it was like a theater in the round, so you could like go up the stairs. I mean, it was crazy, and it's like that's this under the same umbrella as a guy like as Stephen Wright, you know, like this is technically the same art form, but completely different flavors, you know.
Not anybody can do that. Like, you can't teach that. You just have to, you have it, or you work really, really freaking hard at it.
Yeah. But there's just so many things to always be aware of, and like, how can you get better at all these facets, you know? And that's why it is a life's pursuit. If you really make it your career, it's just like, you just keep going to the gym every day, you know, you just keep, you keep just like, you don't even notice it until like a year later. You're like, wow, I'm so much better than I was a year ago. It's like, well, I showed up every day and I did the work.
Yeah. Towards the end of your special, you had just an incredible crowd work moment. What
a pull. That was so wild.
So that couldn't have been, I mean, obviously, did you expect to have a crowd moment that you thought you could maybe add into the special, or it was just it happened and you're like, this is gold?
Yeah, it just was like one of those ones where I felt like it was kind of like, it was weird enough and cool enough that I felt it was okay to put in the special. Because I think I'd had like maybe 1 or 2 like crowd work moments. Because I did whatever, like I did 5 shows with Nick and I headlined my own show. So 6 shows in a weekend. you're going to talk to the crowd a little bit here and there. And, I'm a little looser on stage. So I knew like generally all the jokes I wanted to get to, but I might've switched the order every other night, or like, like the each show is different, like you never really know. And so I'm okay just doing like, all right, I saw this guy with the suit. Like I wanted to talk to him. I didn't even really honestly think mostly about the cameras. Like I was like, every time I was like, let's just put on the best show.
Yep.
Let me give like the best half an hour, and that will lead to a good special. So that happened. And then when we were editing it, I was like, I don't know, this is good. Like this is a fun moment. It doesn't feel dated. I think if you watched it in a year, you wouldn't feel like, oh, that's weird. Like it just happened and it was very organic. And like, dude, people after the show were like, that was my favorite part of the show. Like if we have real people during the show coming up to you, like, that was so funny. Or like after I posted an Instagram post later that week, be like, oh, thanks for letting me shoot it. And like so many people were like, dude, the suit guy thing, I was at the suit guy show. You got to put that in. So it's like, I had enough positive response just from the show and after that. I was like, all right, people liked it enough that I think I'm going to put it in there. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was special. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Well, the special Live from Portland, it's on YouTube. Are you working on the next, or do you just kind of like, I need to really push this and just kind of see where we go, or what?
I mean, I'm definitely, now that it's out there, you're doing always hitting people up. Can I do a pod, or can we get this out somewhere, or an interview or whatever? But yeah, I mean, obviously, it's really, I actually did not expect to be this happy to be done with a set of jokes. Like, cause I'd been doing comedy when I recorded, I'm coming up to 12 years in comedy, which is, that's a lot. I mean, it's not like when you hear guys who've been doing it 35 years, whatever, but I've spent almost 12 years of my life pursuing the same thing. And like, until you put something down for people to see, like you can always draw from older jokes,
Yep.
And like, obviously my first 5 years, probably first, 6, 7 years, really, I can't even remember a lot of those jokes, like I have so many jokes that I wrote and did that you just kind of lose them to time because you write better jokes. But once you actually say like, this is a piece of work that I'm going to record and they're out there, like I was so happy to be like, oh man, there is pressure to write new jokes, but there also is a relief of pressure of like, I don't have to say these. I don't have to feel burdened to like, because I toured that set hard, like I knew I was recording in April. So like I was on the road a lot in February and March, like really trying to get it as tight as possible. So headlined a lot of rooms, a lot of clubs, and just like, you want to work it as much as you can. So by the time I was done, I was like, dude, I'm so glad I don't have to do this. And it,
yeah,
I was out of the van by that point. It wasn't even really like, like I was kind of done with that chapter of my life. So it felt like that part felt good to kind of wrap up and be like, yeah, this is it. And yeah, now there is that challenge of like, let's write. I think the goal for me is like, I want to look back at the one I just dropped, and then let's say I drop one in 2 or 3 years, be like, look at how much better this stuff. Like you want growth. The worst thing you can ever see from a comic is like, oh man, like, and this happens a lot more with famous comics. So I don't think I'm in that boat by any means. So it's like, I still have a lot of that hunger because I'm kind of living on the edge. But you see guys who get money, they get fame, and the comedy suffers because now maybe they're acting more or they're doing more podcasting. That's like, big time money making podcasting. So you just don't get the same level of like killer stuff because their mind is elsewhere, or they got a family and they're like, dude, I'm doing well and I don't need to really bring the heat. Like you don't have that fear of like, dude, if I don't crush as hard as I can, no one's going to help me, no one's going to give me anything. So once you've made it, it's like bands, how many bands keep everybody has a favorite band, like they peaked after their early stuff, and then
I was just thinking the same thing. I'm like, bands that like hate playing their hit songs, God, I just I'll go get a beer then. Like I came here to see it, to hear it, like I want to feel it, and they could care less.
Yeah, and so you want, I think from the goal is like always like, the next thing I do should really blow this one out of the water, is the hope, That's the goal that you're shooting for, is like, man, when the new stuff is ready, it's going to really be like, you want the people who've been following your career to be like, oh wow, Jake made a big jump from 20 from the one a few years ago. So that would be my goal. And so yeah, now it's just slowly, writing, performing every day, just trying to get up as much as possible, and see where we're at.
So the Hardman Soft Boy tour you're on currently, that's separate than your
Yes.
solo stand up then?
Yeah, so I have like obviously my own solo stuff that I tour with, and
Yep.
then the Hardman Soft Boy is it's a live comedy show, and my buddy and Hunter and I do that together. We also have a podcast under the same name, which
Okay.
we may or may not be changing branding a little bit, just to kind of, there's some confusion because when you have a podcast and then you also go on tour, people think it's a live podcast, but it's not. It's a completely different show. But the show is it's a riff heavy show where we have 4 local comics, and we do this thing where audience submit anonymous kind of like drug, sex, rock and roll, party stories, anything that they want to feel share, and it's all anonymous. We gather those before the show, and then we have a comic do like a tight 5-minute set, and then either Hunter and I comes up with them and we riff on the story. So it's very loose. The audience gets into it. It's a lot of fun. But we have a number of shows coming up in the next month. We have one this Saturday in Brooklyn at the Bushwick Comedy Club, but then we're in Minneapolis, we're in Fort Collins, we're in Denver. And so it's kind of like another thing to have to tour on, it's like kind of takes the pressure off of you, especially when I'm like building new material to not, it's like I just burned all this material. I don't have like a new hour, so it's
Right.
kind of like I have some old stuff that I can do, and I have some, looser stuff that will get me across the finish line. But it is kind of nice to be like, oh, I have this whole other thing that I can do with my friend, and it's like a new way for people to discover you. And it really is like a very crowd participation show. So we really get a lot of positive feedback on that show because everybody's like a part of the show, and it's very fun for them. So we're trying to do that. It's just again, it's all this like business stuff of like, now I have to make clips for that. Now I have to, it's like trying to start a second career, like while you're also building a first one. So that is a little bit of like, of a challenge, but it is fun because, Hunter and I have been working together for years, and it is a very fun show to be a part of. And I think if we get a big enough following, it could be something that people really want to come out and check out on their own. And then, hopefully they also go, oh, next time you're in town solo, I'll see your solo stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
yeah, and it's great. Like you just said, I think it's perfect. Like the formula of you're touring solo, you put out the special, and then you give yourself a breather to work on stuff, and you do this. You do the 2-man show, the live show, and it's perfect breather for it.
Totally.
So next year you said you're already booking out. Like, is there anything you want to promote or anything you want to announce? Like anything, I guess, date wise, or is it just kind of like we're waiting till next year?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely have some dates. February 10th through the 15th, I'm at the Comedy Cave in Calgary. I will be headlining Comic Sense in Boulder, February 28th and March 1st. I will be headlining Sisyphus Brewing in Minneapolis, March 21st and March 22nd. Potentially some Philly dates in late March, and then a few odd like one-nighters in like late April in like Virginia and upstate New York. But yeah, the calendar is always changing, and if people follow me, like my website's thecomedianjake.com, and a link tree is also in all my social media bios at thecomedianjake and all those. So very easy to find where I'm at, but I'm always adding shows, and then I'm just, when I'm in New York, I'm doing just as many shows as I can in New York. And and if people ever want, I'm always open. I'm always down to do weird stuff. So if anybody's ever like, oh, maybe a private show, or maybe I've performed at these van gatherings before. I've done a wedding. I haven't done a funeral yet. I'm waiting to do my first funeral. But I've done weddings. I've done backyards and basements. I've done rooftops. I've done the gamut, so I'm open to all offers. But yeah, it's, that's when you're at this stage, it's all just self-financed and just hoping to kind of get month by month, year by year, and then hopefully you look back and go, all right, we built something here, you know?
Well, my family that's listening, if I die soon, book Jake, please, at the funeral.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I would love to do your funeral if it ends tragically young.
That's awesome. Well, man, thanks. I can't say thank you enough for coming on the show, and we're gonna promote the crap out of Live from Portland. I can promise you that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, great. I love talking, talking shop is so, I mean, it's like every comic gets addicted to this stuff. So it's very fun to have an opportunity to do it. I appreciate you having me on.